Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah.
Yeah, but can we keep the part where I yell, more?
No.
But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got like what, 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, you want to start with that?
Here we go. Exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing it the exact same way? Let's start with Smoky Bar.
No, it's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch. And it's not an intro unless I'm botching.
You're on.
You're on. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Wisdom Check. There's my co-host Dustin, just sliding in right at the last moment.
Did I make it?
Just
Am I
barely.
here?
So I'm Jeff. That's Dustin over there, and we are joined tonight by Jbrews, who's been with us in the past. So welcome to the Wisdom Check once again, there, Jbrews. It's been how long ago now? It's like episode 3 or something like that.
Yeah, I think we were episode 2, maybe 3, somewhere around there.
Man.
Oh, that's not true. It was like 5 or 6.
Okay, it's one of those numbers. Really
He was
early.
6. I'm almost positive he was 6.
The small single digits.
It was before 10, though. Yes, it was it was early on.
Yeah, we appreciate you, man. It's good having you back. We know that there's been a lot that's been going on since the last time we spoke to you on here, so we're going to definitely get into that. Before we do, though, I will make one comment. Our software for the closed captioning has apparently changed tonight, so we're not going to be able to use it tonight. We're going to try to figure that out for next week, but for those of you guys who rely on that, sorry. We'll try to get it going.
They upgraded.
Yeah.
They upgraded beyond our capability to figure out how to use it in less than 20 minutes. So we'll get all that hammered out before next week. We didn't know there was a patch.
Yep,
so.
surprise technical things here. But anyway, yeah, welcome to the show again, man. It's good having you.
Hey, thanks. It's good to be back. It was really fun the first time, and I was like, you know what? As soon as I saw an opening, I was like, hey, Dustin, I hear you have openings.
It's true. We finally decided to open up the gates to return guests. We did that, probably like a month ago. We decided to have people come back that have been on before because so much has happened in literally like a year and a half probably since some of you were on the show. So
It's got to be up there, man. It's hard to believe this show has been going for what could be a year and a half at this point. That actually is kind of mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
you guys haven't missed a single
Nope.
Monday like the whole time. So
we haven't missed a
insane.
single Monday yet. Yeah, it's been just solid for literally a year and a half because we started in March. This is September, so that's yeah.
Yeah, and you know how this goes, right? Because you've been ramping up your schedule here with the streaming. So it piles it in there, it piles those hours in. And as we can see in the chat here, Joker's been a fan from the Shadowrun days there, seeing you on the channel. So I know you still do quite a bit with Shadowrun. What have you been up to recently?
Yeah, so every Thursday night for my stream over at twitch.tv/Jbrews, we run a weekly Shadowrun Let's Play where we're working with Catalyst Game Labs, the creator of Shadowrun. They were cool enough to give us some content ahead of time, so we've been able to push a little bit extra out and show some people some new stuff that our players can go ahead and dabble in and what they can look forward to once it releases. It's a pretty cool opportunity.
Yeah, that's really cool, actually. So, like, getting to get your hands on books that haven't been released yet has got to be freaking awesome, especially to be kind of like the one source for that. Like that's pretty fantastic. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you. It's definitely a dream. It's something that I've been working for quite some time, trying to, we've been playing tabletop games, I think, for going on 3 years on the channel. So finding one that actually sticks, that we've been playing off and on through the 3 years, and having a company that's willing to work with us is insane.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I know you're a huge Shadowrun fan, and we did a spotlight with Scott Schlitz, and he was on the show, and then he wanted to run a game for us. And I knew that, like, when we have that game, I was like, I have to get Jbrews on here because he runs Shadowrun. He's a huge fan. So I was super excited that you got to come do that with us for the spotlight. And you can find that spotlight in our VODs here. I don't know if we've ever put the spotlights out on YouTube, have we?
Pretty sure it's on YouTube.
It might be out on YouTube as well. I'd have to look to see if I can find the link for that directly.
I feel like I edited that at one point.
You wouldn't believe the number of people who've asked for a second episode of that spotlight one shot as well. Like we've had people ask for it, so maybe we'll have to do that again sometime. It was a lot of fun. So, I'm glad that that helped lead to you getting to work with Catalyst Games, and it sounds like you're getting a lot of really cool content. So tell us a little about what's going on in your Shadowrun game right now.
So right now we're running the campaign module 30 Nights by Catalyst, and as of right now, the group is going to Toronto because US and Canada are all one big giant place now. So a group went from Seattle all the way over to Toronto to try to figure out why the power in the Matrix is out in Toronto. So they're currently going through completely blind. They have no Matrix and very little technical capability. So everywhere is a hike pretty much for them.
Oh, wow.
So it is a very interesting twist. And they're met a couple people. They had some companions and friends die in the last episode. No players, but NPCs that they were able to meet along the way. And it was a very emotional episode. It was really good, though.
Oh, well, nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, what did you do to kind of ramp up that emotionality in the episode? Like, were there any tricks you kind of deployed there?
I didn't. It was mostly the players that were the ones making the connection. They were definitely like more of an outgoing character, and they sort of grab onto that hook. And as soon as you get a hook, you want to hold on to that fish as long as you possibly can until something happens. And they sort of just took and ran with it. It was a really good opportunity. Again, it was mostly just the players that went with it.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think you have to, because there's only so much as a GM you can do to you can set the scene, and you can try to put all the pieces there but at the end the players have to put all that together, and they have to emotionally invest in it, or you're not going to get that back out of them. Yeah,
that could be pretty tricky. I feel like certain game systems tend to pull you in that direction a little bit, but it still is all about the buy-in from the players. So it's great. Yeah, that's freaking awesome when you can find a group that's willing to get into that, to show a little bit of range.
Yeah, and again, this group that we've been playing with, most of them is veteran players I've played with for the last 3 to 5 years, either on or off stream.
That helps.
And then now that we've had more or less a consistent cast for the last 6 to 8 weeks, everyone's sort of feeling like where their comfort zone is with each other, and then trying to expand a little bit beyond that to try to really bring what the real life emotion would be with the situations. Which hats off to my players for being able to even go beyond what their comfort zone is to begin with. So.
Yeah, and I think there's something to like the modern settings of like Shadowrun and some other game systems where it's a little bit more familiar, so it's easier to kind of tap into the feelings that you would have. Whereas the fantasy genre, it's definitely, it feels like it's somewhere else. It feels like it's happening to somebody different a little bit, at least to me.
Yeah. I think that the fantasy, like I think we said last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, we said that you make superheroes in D&D, especially with 5e, you feel really invulnerable a lot. It's like you're building superheroes, and not that you can't tell good emotional stories with superheroes. We see it in the DC, Marvel, and other comic universes all the time. But a lot of times to get to that point, you have to push even harder. You have to push really hard to get the players to a point where they feel that. Whereas other game systems, and I think maybe Shadowrun's one of them, it's a little easier to get to those beats. And I don't know if it's because it's a more modern feel, so things are more familiar, or if it's just that the things that we go back to talk about, like the level of danger, the actually having other PCs in a game, be at, have critical things happen to them, or you can always do things to an NPC, but it's harder to get players invested in an NPC than it is another PC. So
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes that helps a bit, is if the system really lends towards creating those beats of drama to begin with.
Yeah, and I definitely think, at least with Shadowrun, because with Shadowrun, you're more or less making hired criminals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have people who drive on like Joe was saying, you have people who drive on that gray line and go back and forth, which
Mhm.
can create a lot of interesting interactions between the players. Where like you were saying, you're making superheroes in D&D, so most of people are just trying to be the best good guy they can be, compared to I'm going to be the best bad guy I can be. I know, like on our show, like we quote Wreck-It Ralph a lot. Like, just because I'm a bad guy doesn't make you a bad guy.
Mhm.
And that's it. I think it's a very interesting interaction that Shadowrun gets to have. That I have trouble maybe necessarily doing with a chaotic evil character in D&D that tries to become good or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's some element of I don't know, fantasy games come across a little bit more black and white, even if the world isn't. I think that's just kind of like the bias that it has. Like you're playing a game of heroes overcoming great evil, and you can play a anti-hero or a great character, but it doesn't feel the same. The motivations aren't the same. It feels like the stakes aren't the same, and like what we've talked about a lot of times with these different genres is that it feels like, at least in our campaigns, we're often on the move. We're always globe-trotting, as we say, and dealing with big threats and stuff. So like the locality of it is not there. So you don't have like this is our city kind of thing going on. You don't have like my house is like 2 blocks over there. I have to live here after I shoot up this place. Like that kind of stuff doesn't stick around in our fantasy games very often. And I think that has something to do with it.
Yeah, well, we got Canadian Wolverine here says that when he thinks Shadowrun, he thinks of Bright
Mm-hmm.
and Heat, Ocean's 11, Smoking Aces. Those are heist films.
Mm-hmm.
What they all have in common is those are heist films.
Right.
So, and I'm actually running a heist film with my Zweihander campaign to a degree. It started out as one. It's gone haywire since then.
It went crazy, go nuts. Yeah.
One, and so you get these groups of morally gray people making morally gray choices, and you can get into those. You get into the moral aspects of it, which leads then to potentially emotionally charged scenes. Sometimes it gets so wacky that you lose all the emotion in the scene. I think maybe that happened a little last night in Zweihander, but it was still it was a situation where you had a PC technically die, but all the pieces were there to do something fantastically weird, and that's where it went.
Yeah.
So you don't always have those options maybe with Shadowrun, but at the core though, you're dealing with those same kind of archetypes, and that's what really sets something like Shadowrun apart from something like 5e or Pathfinder. You're probably not running a heist film with either of those systems.
Yeah, I think the consequences feel different. Like I think the thing that's in common with the different games where we played that we seem to get this stuff in, like Shadowrun, World of Darkness, Zweihanders. I think it has to do with that like lethality, like you are susceptible to the environment in a way that you're not in a superhero game or in a D&D type game, where it's consequences feel real. Like the outcome of a scene doesn't feel foregone, like stealth could happen. But yeah, I think last night's game of Zweihander that we were talking about, referencing there, yeah, things crossed into like, holy shit, this is out of our hands. Yep, just screw it. Let's just roll. What's happening? Okay, thermonuclear. Let's go. Yeah.
Yes.
No,
The lid came off.
And now I'm writing this sort of stuff, but you're in a position now where you're getting this content given to you from other creators at this point. So is that something that's new for you? Because I know what you did Call of Cthulhu. Did you run a module with that also?
So we had a couple different one shots. The first one shot I actually created, and it took a different appeal to it. But then there was another one I did do a created module that was within the player's handbook of it, or the GM's guide, or whatever you want to call it. But it is definitely something new to me. I've dabbled in it before with like Curse of Strahd when that first came out for 5th edition, and then we had a different couple other opportunities, but really it was just sort of been more of, hey, you know what, this is the world I've created, and homebrew it is how I like to go. And it's still something I prefer in Shadowrun, but I take a lot of the content, sort of twist it.
It looks like your cat may have found a nice toy back there.
I was I didn't see what I saw the cat back there at one point, and then I heard the noise, and I was like, "That is not a cat noise," but I didn't pick up that it was a toy. But that makes way more sense now. I was like, "What do you got? Like a chinchilla back there or something? Like what is that?"
It's a dust cloud rising up on this side. Yeah. Well, sometimes you got to roll with things, right? And that was like one of the things we were considering talking about tonight was. Kind of touching back into the world of planned versus ad-libbed kind of gameplay, like how much the game benefits from one versus the other. And I feel like these modern games, I think, because of their open-endedness, I think they tend to go towards more ad-lib. And I think that's what sort of happened last night too in this way.
Well, I'll tell you, as a GM who writes his own content. And this is where I'm going to use my favorite Mike Tyson quote of all time. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yep.
That is exactly what happens when you're a GM. And I'll be honest with you. I think it's a fine line between whether the plan was your own plan or a plan you picked up because you purchased a book and decided this is the plan. Mm-hmm. The moment someone gets punched in the face, plan gets thrown out the window a lot of times, and you find yourself in ad-lib territory. Mm-hmm. I think between sessions, that's where things are different between a homebrew campaign and a non-homebrew campaign. Mm-hmm. If you're using module, is that's the point where you have to figure out how you're going to reroute players back to where they need to be in order for the game to continue. Yeah. So do you find that to be something that you have to deal with a bit, Jbrews?
Yeah. Because when you're homebrewing, everything is at least most of the times, at least for my players, everything's ad-lib. Mm-hmm. Because they like to go on the complete 180 degree, I didn't even think this was an option type thing. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to more written stuff, it's definitely, it takes a little bit of time to tweak. I have to look back at the section that we did the previous session, or rewatch the VOD of the last session, and be like, okay, so this is what they just did, and then now what decisions pivot to go to different either different sections as a module, or is it something I sort of homebrew to connect it to a different storyline within that same module? So there's a couple of different choices you have the opportunity with, but yeah.
Do you find that the content that you're getting to run is on rails a bit, or do you find that it's pretty expansive and broad to where your players have a lot of room for wiggle?
Some parts, it depends on which part of the module they're in. When you're in the earlier portions of it, it definitely feels very railroad. Mm-hmm. That's because, you're starting off a story, they want you to at least get into that general direction. Now that we're starting to get into the meat of it, you have different avenues that, certain events trigger different things that happen. Mm-hmm. So I don't say it's railroaded. It definitely has different lanes you can switch between quite easily.
So you feel like there's parallel stories in there that can be told.
Oh yeah, for sure. I know we're on, I think, day 3 of what's considered the 30 days, and they've already started 3 different storylines. Maybe they don't even know it, but they've at least set things in motion for 3 other events that happen within the campaign setting.
That's cool.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean,
so go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, yeah, you run into familiarity with groups as well, I think. So, when it comes to these kind of ad-lib territories, you don't know what to expect, but you know what general area to expect the unexpected in, right? Are you getting that kind of feel from your group, or is it still feel like it's just randomness?
The last 6 weeks, I'd say, since we actually got a more consistent cast, we've had a revolving door for the last couple months. But once we got the last 6 to 8 weeks, I would say that we really started to sit down with the core people, and I'm starting to fine tune that radar. It was on a spectrum 0 to 180, is they could go anywhere. Now probably 1 to 75, you're probably going to go this way unless something X happens. If X happens, then I don't know where you guys are going. But otherwise, I can pretty much sort of understand where they're going to go and sort of get a little bit of planning done for the next session instead of looking through the book real quick.
Yeah, well, I mean, and players have tendencies. And if you work with the same group long enough, you can really hone in on those tendencies and narrow down the field of what you think will happen. it's when you're running with people that you don't always run with that sometimes they'll really throw you for a loop. And I play with Chuck from Defenders of Cobalt over at Notorious DMG, and I know if there's a chance to set a fire, Chuck's going to do it.
There will be fire. Yeah.
It's just guaranteed to be a fire. So like, I know that that's always going to be part of the plan with Chuck because I've played with him enough now. I know that, so I can narrow down kind of what the options are. Sometimes when I'm dealing with certain kind of players, like I know what their tendencies are going to be. So yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. Then when you're working with your module, you can look at your avenues and you can say, well, here's what my players are probably going to do. But that doesn't get you out of the impromptu ad-libbing, does it?
Mm-mm.
Not even a little bit.
You got a particular story that you have that really jumps out at you as like one of the more interesting times?
Not from the module, but there was definitely an event where previous campaign they were running around causing, just not really thinking what the consequences were for their actions, running around and having full firefights in the gas station, driving off, make sure they're wiping themselves from security, and then they barked up the wrong tree. And for those of you who don't know, dragons still exist in Shadowrun, but they usually run large corporations. So then they get kidnapped. It's weird what happens when you start knocking on mega corporations' doors and, hey, go find these people because I can pay you millions of dollars to go do so. And then they get kidnapped, and then they're face to face with a very wealthy, very old individual who's like, hey, you work for me now because otherwise you die. It was a very interesting moment, and it was definitely a shock and awe for some of the players that were like, oh, there's consequences to throwing grenades in buildings. Okay, this checks out now.
And sometimes you just have to teach them that lesson one time, and they never forget it. So
the old
that's how it was. Each one of them were like, okay, now so our matrix person will check and see, okay, cool, we're no longer on to scrub all evidence that we were here off. It definitely changed the play style, and sometimes I think you have to have that little tough love, like, hey, you know what? If you want to play a murder hobo, go ahead and do it. But the rest of the world isn't going to like that, and you'll eventually become a target.
Well, it's difficult because, and I was having the same problem with my Zweihander group to a degree, where it was like, okay, you're all shady criminal types. I need something other than money to make your world go round. So like it was, and that's the tough bridge to jump when you're dealing with maybe morally gray characters is that it's very easy for them to cut and run.
Oh yeah. There were multiple times where we were like, consequences are coming. I don't know if we need to be here for those. We can just cut out. It'll be fine. It'll probably really be better for us in the long run. Sorry about that town over there. I don't know. They're going to be in a bad situation here really soon. A pink demon flying in the sky. Yeah. See you guys.
So do you find that you have tricks for keeping your players in Shadowrun invested in more than the paycheck?
Yeah, because they have a really cool mechanic in Shadowrun with contacts. You can reach out to different contacts, whether it's your fixer who gives you jobs, or maybe it's a drug dealer that knows all about X, Y, or Z in a gang. Keeping those contacts ever have their own little plots going. It's a little bit extra work on the GM side. But I feel like if they feel that the world is turning, whether or not they take a bullet, definitely keeps them interested. Whether or not it's only for their own personal gains, like, hey, I want to get X, Y, or Z amount of money so that way I can do this in the world. And it sort of also comes at session 0. We sort of make sure to lay the lines of, hey, I need some goals that your character wants. So that way I know how to keep your character interested. If I'm just throwing money out and your character doesn't care, there's no reason for them to stay, especially when it's Shadowrun where like, oh, hey, I show up for this job. It's not like most adventuring parties who go and continue to work together until it does become that eventually when you do enough jobs together, you begin to trust these people. But I mean, the first couple of jobs you do, you're like, okay, great. This is the amount of money I need. I am now able to go ahead and retire as much as comfy as I want, and this character no longer needs to be a thing.
Now we were Joker down here was saying that Saints Row is like Shadowrun for him, and I was just going to toss this out there because a good friend of ours, and Joker will appreciate this because he's a World of Darkness fan. We just had him on the show a couple weeks ago. A good friend of ours is one of the lead writers for Saints Row games, and a lot of the Saints Row games are Easter eggs from the LARP that me and Jeff were a part of that Champagne Urbana LARP. So
There's
a lot of
character names.
the stuff that's in the Saints Row games comes from we have a very special connection to because our buddy Steve Jbrews, he wrote a lot of stuff from LARP into Saints Row. So there's a lot of Easter eggs in there for us. Like it's a true story. I know the real Eddie Pryor.
Yep.
Like, so it's funny when we see that stuff in there. But
I was surprised to see what Oleg looked like, but
yeah. When your character appears on screen in a video game, it's pretty weird.
Yeah. Oleg Krylov was me and LARP, but
that was right.
I wasn't super huge, but that was based on me. So
it was based on Jeff. Yeah. So
knowing that,
it's just funny that you brought that up there, Joker, because we were at ground zero of where Saints Row was born. So we're.
Yeah,
I want to get Steve to come on the show sometime to talk about that too. That's another show for another time. But since Joker brought it up, I just wanted to toss that out there. So back to what we're dealing with here today with Jbrews and some more Shadowrun stuff. So one of the interesting things that I know when we had you on the show last time, we talked a lot about Shadowrun then about how the game goes through like phases. Like you have like the meet contact phase, and then you have the job phase, and then the pay phase. Like there's and do you find that the newer content still kind of set up in those sorts of phases, like what we kind of talked about before?
Yeah, it's the same algorithm, if you want to call it that. It's a lot of the same thing. It's a lot of the mechanics and stuff on the back end where it's beyond just rolling dice. That's really changed. It's been a lot more simplified. It's like what if Shadowrun 5th edition was 4th or 3rd or 3.5. Shadowrun 6 is now 5th edition. Everything is a lot more cut and dry. It's not like, oh, hey, I don't need 45 dice to be able to make an attack roll. It's, hey, you get a point of edge, which would be similar to like inspiration in 5th edition. So it's a lot of here's some inspiration or here's some edge compared to here's a +2 dice pool. Here's a +3, but I get a -2 because it's foggy outside. It's just a lot of, hey, you know what? You have edge in this situation because you have the right gear for the situation. But no, it's still the same 3 steps. Talk to the job, get the job, do some pre-work for it, do the job, get paid.
Right.
Now, do you find that there's a fair amount of negotiation between GM and players on Edge? Because I know that's like one of Jeff's hangups. What he hates negotiation phase between players and GM. So do you find like that's something you have to do a lot?
Not necessarily. Sometimes they'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and lay the scene. Like you're looking over the compound and there's fog, and I may forget that a player has cyber eyes, for example, that has like vision magnification, so they can actually see further. So the player may remind me they have this piece of technology, then I'll get great. Go ahead and take the edge. It's not like back and forth. Like, well, I think I should have this. It's like my players and I have grown very comfortable. It's like, hey, at this point you don't have edge. I don't see it, but if you can give me a reason that I can see instantly that's, hey, valid. I don't have to go dig through a book and see if you actually get it. I'll go ahead and give it the edge. It's not a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, I think the nice thing about that system is that it's pretty simple. It's just, does it sound like something would be good? Yeah, okay, it's an edge. Done. Like I don't feel like there's as much weird wiggle room that you have to negotiate in that space.
It works a lot like Advantage and Inspiration and 5e. Like they're very simple, basic things that anyone can wrap their head around in no time, and it streamlines and, in my opinion, helps scenes move along quicker at the cost of crunch. And this is always where me and Jeff kind of sometimes butt heads a little, is how much crunch do you need? Do you feel like you miss a lot of the crunch from previous Shadowrun editions with Sixth World?
I do, just because I came in on D&D 3.5, so like that was my baby. That's what I came into. Then the 4th edition came out, and I was like, that's too many actions. I'm going to go back to 3.5. 5th edition came out, and then my friends were like, hey, it's too much crunch. I don't like it. I'll play it if you want to, but I prefer looking at 5th edition because it seems a lot more streamlined. And that's where we sort of came to. And I think it has a lot of good options for both people. I'm just kind of person, if I can spend like 30 to 45 minutes just trying to figure out how to get the best attack to swing at, that's all I'm for. But I also can understand too a new player who might be coming into Shadowrun 6th World and be like, I just want to roll dice and tell a really cool story that's in a futuristic world. And I can definitely see that, 6th edition may be that. Now, what Catalyst is doing is really cool with their 6th edition books. They're actually selling it for 5th and 6th edition. They'll put both stat blocks side by side, so you can use the book for either one. So they're still growing the 5th edition without sacrificing stuff for 6th, which I think is a really good move. It gets those people who are new to Shadowrun, and then they may be like, okay, so I like this book, but 5th edition, this is really cool because it has all the crunch and stuff in it as well.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting way of doing it, because I mean, page space is at a premium, obviously. So I mean, they're not doing that at without a cost. So
that would probably make the book fairly thick by the time they're done.
Well, I think that goes to show that you have enough of an audience in both of those camps that they need to cater to both. Because, like you said, like I am definitely like you, Jbrews. I'm a little bit more crunchy. I like the system mastery is an enjoyable part of the game to me. Like, like I enjoy games like Diablo and stuff, and that's part of the appeal, is coming up with your build and doing your thing. So like for me, some of the games that are a little simpler, where that stuff is gone, to me that's like they've taken away an aspect that's fun to me and given me the same extra stuff that I already had before. So like to me, it just feels like less than. But for other people, I can understand that. If you come into a game session and you're like, man, I don't want to learn rules. I just want to just be here and just eat some pretzels and drink my beer and have a good time. Yeah, simpler game system is going to work better for them. So no problem for them. But I don't know. Like to me, the cyberpunk genre is just so like just in its nature, just so much about modification. That transhumanism element that's, to me, like the nuts and bolts of it is important. And gear, of course, and technology and stuff seems like that's a layer that, for me, I would want to be really crunchy, but other people not.
Well, I mean, these companies, and Catalyst one of them, they're recognizing the popularity of 5e and the huge amount of new players that came into 5e, and they're saying, hey, like, we need to make our game system something they can grab onto, because eventually they're going to bore themselves at 5e and start looking for other things, other genres. And so this is a great, like, Sixth World is like their version of like a gateway drug into Shadow World. Like, here you go, like, come check this out. So because it's something they can easily get right into and then use it to tell a different kind of story. Because we see all the time, like, different systems tell different stories. Mm-hmm. So they get tired of telling superhero stories with 5e. They can find themselves wanting to play a little grittier game. Maybe Shadowrun's going to be right there for them.
Right, and that's 6th edition is still a very crunchy game compared to like D&D or D&D 5th edition. It's like you still have that crunch. It's not necessarily just gone.
Right.
Just comparatively, and you also with 5th edition, I think they had 25 splat books through the full run of 5th edition. So it's just a lot of other just shelf space that you're also saving going to the different editions. So I think it's an interesting step. There's a lot of stuff that they change with the mechanics wise that I think is a really good thing for the game. Some things it makes characters obviously more deadly or able to die quicker. It's a very interesting thing they did with 6th edition compared to 5th. But again, with the crunch wise, I'm always about to be like, let me spend like a day and a half looking at this character sheet and be like, this is the build. And it just, for me, that's just like, if I can find that perfect build, that's like great. This is the character I want to play. I can just toss a warlock up in 5th edition, just like give me 25 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously you can get more in depth the backstory and stuff like that, but it doesn't have the amount of choices that Shadowrun has. So you have all these, like he was saying, you have all the cyber, you have all this technology, you have all this magic in different forms. There's just a lot of different things that go into it.
Well, yeah, and just making a character when you have to go through a whole priority process and just figuring out what your priorities are, and then in each of those priorities, then figuring out what everything's going to be. So, I mean, I know I got to make one character for that spotlight we did, and it took me a few days just sorting through the book, figuring out what my options were, and getting it all done. Whereas if you're making like a 5e D&D character, you're just making them at one level, usually level 1 the first time, right? You're just playing level 1. You get like 3 choices and then you're going to be done because that's level 1. All the rest of the choices are down the road. So,
yeah, and it's interesting. In the chat here, we're Joker, who plays a lot of World of Darkness and who we had on the show the other day, and we talked about a lot of lore, is saying that in spite of the fact that there are like 6,000 books for World of Darkness lore, that he finds the Shadowrun lore a little overwhelming. That blows my mind, actually.
Do you find that to be something that you have to contend with now that you're running Shadowrun with Catalyst?
Yeah, because a lot of it, when I was running homebrew, I'm like, you know what? This happened because I said it happened. And I took my runners to Indianapolis, and they did a lot of stuff around here. And it was very interesting. But that stuff isn't written in other books, so I can get to put that out. But now, if it's like, this shop actually is here, well, Caddis is like, well, it's actually like 4.5 blocks over on X Street. But I appreciate what you're doing. Not that it's a bad thing. It's just I spend more time now reading the lore and a lot of the stuff than I do really planning my games more in depth. That's why I like sort of like using the module now. It gives me that opportunity to look at the lore and where they're going and what partnerships they're having compared to having to worry about the ad lib, what's going to happen in 2 or 3 steps, and then just ad libbing the lore behind it as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a difference of your particular situation where you're putting out content for the company, and a home game where you're just like, we can wing it and it's okay, right?
Right.
That limitation's got to be a tough one for sure. Because that's like the big thing that Justin and I have talked about in the past with like IPs and stuff, is feeling those walls. Like, I know I have to be right at all times on this thing. It makes it difficult. And like, I think what they're saying there with just forgetting about the big picture and bring it down to the street level, that's always been kind of the solution, I think, for some of these games, like World of Darkness and Shadowrun. I think bring it down to the level of the players, what they're doing, and then have those other world events occurring, but they're not directly linked in.
That's the answer for homebrew. But when you're running content put out by the publisher, their publisher is going to link that content directly to their overarching storyline. So you got to know it then, right? I mean, is that what you're experiencing, Jbrews? Is like, it's not really...
Yes and no. And I've actually had the pleasure of having a conversation about some of the information I put in as, homebrew, and sort of mixing and be like, well, how exactly would that work in the lore? So I've actually had have a little bit more in-depth conversation on how my homebrew would actually affect the world and how people actually interact with it, which is a mind-blowing thing. That's even like a conversation piece. But it's definitely, you have to take a time to step back, especially like I have a couple days throughout the week after I stream, I go ahead and just prep for the next session. And one of those days is like looking back at actual published lore and like, okay, so these are what all the expectations I should look at, and then how that goes through the years, because sometimes they touch on a lore that's like 20 or 30 years old, and in the lore, how does that transpire to 2085 or whatever it is now, depending on when you want to run your game. So it's definitely a little bit of still using that imagination of homebrew, but you at least get with the lore a very fine outline of, hey, this is definitely what they don't do, but you sort of work with in the company. That's a nice thing. Multiple buildings or multiple organizations have different offices, right? Which is run by different people inside of a corporation. Yeah, they go to large meetings and stuff like that, but each office is probably ran a different way. Each little group within that office is probably ran a different way, each subgroup and stuff like that. So you get a little bit of flexibility. And touching on the piece, like, looking at a smaller picture. And I think that's where Shadowrun grows. You don't, as you guys we had a conversation about after our spotlight, you sort of feel as big as you do starting off as a character, like at character creation, right? So there's not a lot of growth. I mean, there is, but it's not exponential like in D&D. So I think a lot of times you feel like your character is growing when the story is growing in volume around you.
Okay. Right.
So I think that's a more like the leveling up is like, you know what, we're starting to inch our way into like, okay, we're getting out of going and robbing a milk store down the street. Now we're like, okay, the gang is interested in us now. So I think it's more reputation that begins to grow, and that really shows your character development. Necessarily, I gained a new level, so I get 4 new spells and a +1.
Right. Yeah. That is an interesting thing too. I mean, that is a style where you feel strong because you are surviving what's happening around you. You're jumping into a different arena, and you're still holding your own. Or maybe you're getting pushed back down the ladder a little bit, and it's time to find another route. That is a fascinating thing. I hadn't really thought about that as how it would play out.
Yeah, because what you do in a lot of standard fantasy games, whether it's Pathfinder or D&D with a leveling system, is you graduate.
Mm-hmm.
You start out, it's like elementary school, right? You start out, it's like, oh, cool, we're fighting the half challenge rating kobolds and the half challenge rating skeletons, or maybe a goblin, right? Like, and then eventually it's like, well, those aren't challenging anymore. So we moved up to orcs and ogres, and then eventually you're on to giants. And then, if you get near the end of the game, it's like, well, it's probably a dragon, because what else is there up there at those levels, right? So, like, you already know what your storylines have to eventually lead to, because that's what the challenge rating of monsters are. You graduate. Mm-hmm. Whereas in these other systems, like, yeah, it is. The feeling of accomplishment and leveling is usually in other intangible things. It's not directly on the sheet.
And that's why I think it's a little bit different between like 5th edition and Shadowrun is you're not fighting monsters. I mean, there may be some in there, but there were once, you and I could be a human, you could be human, but I fall asleep and wake up the next morning, I'm now a troll. Mm-hmm. But that just because I'm a troll doesn't mean I'm a bad character or a monster. Right. I'm just a person who got affected by some genome. Right. And I think that's what a big thing is like most of the people you're fighting are going to be human people. They have lives, they have families, mm-hmm. They have jobs, not necessarily, it's a kobold that just is upset because you took his candle.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's a value to that person. It's not just a obstacle to steamroll. Yeah. Yeah. It's an important aspect. And again, I think that's a characteristic of these modern world settings. The realism of it is, it's not like G.I. Joe, let's mow down all the unnamed mobs out there. It's, that's Bill, Bill from accounting over there is standing across the way from me. Got it. Yeah. Yeah, we had drinks the other day. Oh, okay.
Call of Duty wants a scented candle kobold. He's a Cincy kobold.
Nice. Yep. So with these module games, though, you've got NPCs and stuff you got to personify as well. Are you getting kind of any coaching on how they're supposed to be played, or what they should sound like, or any of that sort of stuff?
Just in the module itself?
Just in the module itself. It's, they gave a background to the character, like what their role is. Are they a runner? Are they just a corporate person? Are they someone who just happens to be walking across the street as Joe Smo, the NPC? And it gives like a little bit of, what they look like, who they are. But other than that, it's still, which I really enjoy about playing the modules, it's still my voice being given to it. Mm-hmm. Necessarily then, hey, this person is X, Y, or Z. And I've even taken some of the information, I changed it a little bit. If they're not like a big NPC, so it's like use Gang Boss 4 as the template and make a character for it. Instead of, hey, this is this is Konami, and this is how he needs to act because it's part of the story. You still get opportunity to make your own people, make your own NPCs and tell the story that they're telling, but with individual people, which still gives the game replayability, right? Because you can like, hey, this person's a troll this time, but the next time maybe it's changing a little bit, and now it's a human female. So it's interesting.
That's cool. There's a bit of neat flexibility then in there that maybe you don't think of with something that you think of as a module that you're going to pick up and run. And I think sometimes modules get a bad name just because you get to, especially if you're coming in from like a D&D, an older edition where module meant like levels of dungeon, solid walls, you can't leave it, and so I can see where like when you're dealing with a module that's built, I think it just has to do with more being built in a city. I really feel like that's what really changes the difference is when you're, and maybe that's what I'm pulling off as Zweihander a bit too, is like you're in this city, everything is going on around you. You can't run away from your problems. You have to deal with it, sort of thing. Like, do you feel like that's maybe at the core of what really works for this kind of a system for Shadowrun as well?
I would honestly think so. And especially because you think about, you have people with contacts, you have people with connections at home. Well, if you, just let a bomb go off, how many people is that going to affect? That your fixer's daughter was actually at the grocery mart when that happened. Now the fixer blames you for not stopping the bomb because you just let it go off. Now you lose that contact on top of it. So I think it's, this is your stomping ground, right? So you have to sort of worry about what happens in it. have it across the world. Whatever happens in like Hong Kong, okay, so it may have some ramification because now a new corporation takes over, but otherwise it doesn't affect the players day to day because they run in the shadows anyway, right? So I definitely think more of it being a city focus compared to a dungeon in some wizard tower 80 feet below ground is a completely different thing compared to, hey, this is Joe's shop from across the street.
Right, because I mean, you could take a skyscraper, for instance, and grid it out level by level, office by office, and make a legit dungeon. If you really, really were interested in doing so, you could do it that way. Like it's a building with multiple levels, and the big bad end guy's at the top of it instead of at the bottom of it. Like it's like a Shinra building from Final Fantasy VII. Like you could exactly pull that same sort of deal off if you really wanted to. So it's not capable of it. It's just the intent and goal of what you're doing in that system that makes you look at that and go, well, that's not what this game system would be about. If I tried to do that in Zweihander, like I'd kill them all.
Right, and I think I've done that before. I've actually, they wanted to break into a smaller corporation that was a subsidiary of one of the AAAs, and they did it, and they had to fight their way or get a key card or some way get from first floor to 300th floor. You can go ahead and go up all 300 floors, but my guess, probably by floor 5, you're probably going to die from a stray bullet. But it's completely possible to do. It's just changed in a different way. You're going a lot of times. I feel like you're going up instead of going down.
Yeah. Because I mean, it's a city is inverted when you think of it as far as where power structure goes. The most powerful people live elevated, high up, for various different reasons. Usually inside of cities, just the cost of the luxury of it, right? The ivory tower to look down from. Those kind of concepts play more heavily in a cityscape game versus a travel game.
Definitely generally true, but I would say if you start to look at some like big military things, you start to talk about bunkers and hiding technology underground from surveillance and that kind of thing. So maybe there's some room for subterranean levels, but yeah, I think you're generally right though. Wealth, you need a view. You need your penthouse. That kind of
right.
thing.
And I think it also sort of depends on, if you have more of like an infiltration group who has it's more charismatic, focused people, you're probably going to be going up and trying to talk to the big boss or take care of the big boss. Compare, if you have more of people who like combat and like the crunch and like, hey, I hit you or something like that, then you're probably going down into a bunker, like you were saying. I think it sort of depends on your group. And that's what I really love about this system. You can sort of do a little bit of everything with it, and just sort of twist the story just minutely, and it has very similar feel to it, but in a very large way.
So yeah, and with the Shadowrun thing, you have a lot of avenues. I mean, with the hacking and stuff being a part of the game, how is that kind of playing out now that you've had a lot of time to work with it?
I really enjoy it. They've done a lot of streamlining it, from 5th edition to 6th edition. You don't have to go and like get 85 marks on a single phone to be able to activate this phone. Now you're just like, okay, so I see their person's persona. I can now, if I get backdoor access to it, which was one single roll now, great. I can now do all these other actions. That is one more roll. So at most, you're only rolling like 2 or 3 times to get what you want now, instead of 8 rolls, and now you're taking up an hour of the session just to get a hold of this comm link. Now it's 3 rolls down the roll. You do 1 initiative, and guess what? You've done your job. You set off the alarm. People are starting to panic now. Yeah,
and I think that brings people back together in the table. Is like we were talking the last time about Shadowrun, that like one of the drawbacks we had with those older editions, it just felt like suddenly somebody else was playing a different game. Like they're somewhere else, but we'll get back to you later, whatever that is. And now it feels like you're part of the team, which I think is really cool. Ian Flux has got a question down here saying, have we talked about the lack of traditional classes in the game? I don't think we've directly talked about it, but
we talked about how you don't level up and how progression is maybe more horizontal than vertical. We did talk a little about that, but I guess there isn't really true classes. Now, I kind of, from my one instance of playing Sixth World, I do kind of remember picking like Magician, and then Magician had like somewhat of a set of like boundaries, if you will, for kind of what you can do with it, but nothing as hard-lined as a class from like a D&D or Pathfinder.
Yeah, I definitely think they have what they call archetypes, right? So you have a melee person, but just because you're a melee person doesn't mean you're a tank.
Right.
It has a lot of fluidity to it. And once you start off with one, it doesn't require a multi-class of starting at, 8th level fighter and then 1 level cleric. It's like, oh, I'm just, adding this extra knowledge skill or adding this extra skill point now.
Mhm.
And I know how to do this because I've trained X amount of spent time with this. I like the karma system where you do that sort of leveling. I think it's really good for storytelling instead of one day I woke up and now I know the wish spell.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in theory you could pace out your levels and have a storyteller, go through and say, here's what you're doing to get that. But yeah, I think the assumption is, you wake up because you've been adventuring for X number of days and bam, you've got a new skill. And I do think this kind of goes back to the World of Darkness that Dustin and I are kind of familiar with, and the way leveling up went in there is just you figured out what you'd been doing a lot of or what you needed, and you put some dots in it, or you put a skill on your character where you, and at least our LARP experience, you develop things, relationships, and those were ways you were leveling up. So like, find more contacts, find more. People can get you stuff, that kind of thing.
And it was about spending your XP on things that reflected what your character had done in game versus an arbitrary system of, well, here's what you get. And I think that's maybe the core difference between these systems. And that's where I do like Shadowrun, the way that it's set up for that as well. Because I think that's more in line with what I prefer in a game system as well.
Yeah, I think it's got some strengths for sure.
Yeah, a big thing of that a lot of people don't realize when you level up, you actually have a time equivalent to that. So, like getting a new skill, you literally have to spend a month of downtime learning that skill. Not necessarily like D&D is like, oh, my proficiency bonus went up just because I've been doing it repetitively. Okay, yeah, that sort of makes sense. Mm-hmm. But like when you're going to learn a brand new skill, like you're taking a month out of all sort of Shadowrunning, just practicing the skill until you become at it at best. And I really like it. It definitely feels more story driven than just getting like I said, like a +1 that because the book tells you get, you sort of go and get it because the story says, hey, this is what you get type thing.
Yeah, I guess then that also brings up the issue of downtime. Are you giving your players a chance to spend that downtime? Because some campaigns lend itself to this is the events that are going on today, and then maybe something doesn't happen again for like another week or a month or something. And you just fast forward to that point. But other games, it's this day bleeds into the next. Maybe you don't sleep for a week, that kind of thing.
Are you suggesting that there's no downtime in my game, Jeff?
Maybe. I'm not sure that we have actually even slept.
You guys have slept.
I did get knocked unconscious. That's true. I did fall asleep.
You slept an entire game session.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
Yeah, but these things happen. Yeah. These rapid fire game sessions that.
It's about game design. Once again, it's about game design. Like I went into because I'm writing modules, so these games I'm running, I am turning into modules, trying to turn them into modules.
Yeah,
my players are doing a really good job of turning it into not anything that could be made a module. But I'm working at it. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I really wanted to do with my games as I write these is I wanted there to be a time frame. I consider them short stories. I don't consider them campaigns. So I write them like in Horde and Huttenberg, like the Emperor is arriving in 7 days. Mm-hmm. So I want that constant every time, they fill their morning, their lunch, and their evening with crap they need to get done. And then they realize they take their nap when they wake up. They've lost the commodity of a day. Like I want that there. Now, not all games have to be written that way, but it's something that I wanted for these adventures that I'm currently writing. So is that something that you find where time is important in Shadowrun for your stories that you're writing?
Yeah, so when I'm doing more of sort of open world stuff and not running modules, you say we do a run X, Y, and Z, right? So, I mean, 6th world, there's still, presidential elections and stuff going on. And if I'm running a story that may involve that, I'm like, hey, you know what? You have X amount of months until the presidential election. You have this amount of months. Hey, guess what? They're 2 months away from election time. They actually have a campaign coming in and to try to campaign to lower Seattle or something like that. So I try to do that. Then as the characters earn karma and they want to level up or progress their character some way, they'll tell me how long they need of downtime. And I typically try to go with like the longest person who needs downtime, and go based off that to give that character, because magic takes a little bit longer than learning how to lockpick. So just trying to make sure that people are all being able to take the time they need. But sometimes hey, you know what, you're doing this run, or you're doing this, taking this downtime, but you want to be there for that election just in case, or hey, that election, or someone calls you guys, hey, we want you to run protection detail for this candidate. Sorry, you're not able to do it because you're doing downtime.
Yeah, there's just show some consequence there, yeah. Or just force a choice, I guess, is where you're...
Right, it's not necessarily a consequence, but more of, hey, you can absolutely go and get this +1 in magic, or you can go and do this run where you may get a little bit more karma, you get some cash for doing it, and then maybe you take a vacation afterwards and go do your retreat or whatever you need to do to get that magic increase.
Yeah.
Now, is that hard to get group consensus on when it comes to that? Because, I mean, everyone's going to be in a little different spot probably when job comes along.
And they've sort of become, instead of a group of mercenaries, an actual group of people who prefer to run together instead of Joe from the pub down the street. Now he's my decker. They've become more of a consistent group and are willing to, like, you know what, you go ahead and take this extra day. We're going to go ahead and do some field work. So you can go ahead and keep working, and we'll go ahead and sort of begin our prep work for it. So they try to, allow those players to take that extra time they need to really have that character moment or have that progression, and then they can still continue to do the job at work.
So planning your Shadowrun session in character sounds a lot like your group trying to find the time to play the game out of Can you play on Thursday, Bob? No, I'm sorry, I've got this going on. I can't. Can you do next Saturday? Okay, yeah, we can play next Saturday. That's
yeah, not only do we have to worry about scheduling outside of game, but we also have to worry about scheduling inside a game. It's a whole new level, really, of tabletopping.
It's like Inception. You got scheduling inside your scheduling, so
you love it.
Oh yeah. It's kind of looking at this thing that you're talking about with the the archetypes, but not really classes, right? So one of the topics we were talking through was forced group dynamics. Do you have people being related? Do you have them already being a predefined group ahead of time? Is everyone limited to just this class or that class or this group of races? That sort of thing. Like how like, I guess with Shadowrun, I guess the one would be maybe the corporation you're working with, because that, as we saw in our game, could get pretty messy as an inter-party dynamic.
Yeah, in Shadowrun, I feel like it's a little bit more difficult to have those. Hey, you know what? You're all playing humans, because in D&D, you get racial perks for being a human, right? There's a little bit of everything everywhere, but maybe if I don't want you to play an Anarakra, right, where you can go ahead and have a fly speed at level 1, because for balancing reasons, compared to no human or no person can fly unless you have like a spell that can fly, but then that's a magician thing, not a race thing. I don't really enforce it, but I prefer my characters all to sort of have one of every realm. So you have, one matrix expert, one magic, and one of at least physical and a talk person, just so that way you have all the bases covered. Now my group's a little different right now because we have like an adept, we have 2 mages, and then we have a face. So we don't really have like a matrix person right now, but they don't really need it because it powers out based off the story.
Right.
So it sort of works for the moment, but as soon as Matrix turns on, they're still going to have to worry about all these other Matrix things, but they just won't have anyone to protect them from it. Until they find maybe an NPC that can help them along the way.
I was going to say, do you feel that niche with an NPC then at that point, likely?
It's up to the group. If they want to, spend money or call in a favor to have an NPC come in, I'm more than happy to do that. But I also give the players the opportunities, like this may be a challenge for them. Like, let's see how far we can go on this job without tripping a Matrix related incident. Or I feel confident in our ability, we can go ahead and sneak through this compound without a camera seeing us. We don't need a Matrix to shut it down. we'll be okay. I wanted the players to make that call because, again, I mean, it's a story that we're all telling, and I don't want to throw myself into the game as an NPC if they would rather sort of try to make that achievement, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So from a level of exclusion, you don't really work at a point of exclusion then when you're talking about force group dynamic. But do you ever work on inclusion where you want the players to be brothers, or you want the players to be like their characters to be brothers or related, or have these other connections that come in maybe from other ways? Like, do you work from that angle?
I prefer it, but I never really force it. In D&D, I feel like, I'm more exclusive than inclusive when it comes to like different races and stuff like that, just for either balancing issues or where they're starting off in the world. They may not have a lot of that race or have any of that race for that matter. But when it comes to Shadowrun, it's more inclusive. Like, hey, you know what? It makes sense that you want to play two brothers. That's great. Go ahead and do it. You can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really force it, just because, again, that sort of makes me choose who you're playing. And I'm really more just having you play a character in my story than us creating a story together. And I'm doing like inclusive compared to exclusive.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. Yeah. Go ahead, Dustin.
I was going to say, I know this is one of those points where I think me and Jeff don't always fully agree. But I feel like when you have players that have force group dynamic, and usually this comes from the player end, it's almost never on the DM or GM side. It's usually players who agree to do this. That if there's like two players that do, and the other two or three are not, that it tends to lean story a little too heavily towards the two that are. That it creates a bit of a story imbalance. You're either ignoring it more than you should, or you're leaning into it more than you should story wise at that point. Because if you have four players and two are like brothers, their story is going to be largely intertwined, and that becomes half of the dynamic of what the stories are at that point. So, to me, the group dynamic, I don't necessarily prefer to go too heavy into them. And for that reason alone, like I feel like it lopsides the balance between player characters.
That's interesting. Because I mean, regardless if they're united or not, it's still everyone getting the same amount of attention, right? So I don't see that as a detriment, really. But what I do see, though, is that when you have more people aligned, you have more story that is going in a direction that everyone is happy with, I think. That's the sort of thing that everyone's excited about because that's what they built together. Whereas I find like with just the random people showing up, it feels very much like, okay, it's just that scene with that person that I have nothing that I care about with it, except for that I'm part of the group with them. To
me, it's not about the relationship. It's about, and again, in me, this is session zero. Session zero solves a lot of this, in my opinion. Like, you can all come to a session zero with a character already made that's not any forced group dynamic, and sit down, and by the time you're done, you've come up with those through lines that this is why you're together, this is what you do. Like, you don't have to have a forced group dynamic. For me, forced group dynamics step in situations where the GM needs it to for story purpose because of the story that they've written. I want this to be a war between elves and orcs, and we're on the side of the elves, and I'll let you play a dwarf, I'll let you play a gnome, but orc is out of the question.
Sure.
Force group dynamic. Like, can't play your orc, sorry. This is hard line what I'm doing with this story. So, like, to me, if it's crucial to whatever story is being written, then I get it. That's the part where I'm okay with it at that point. Like, if you want to tell a fantasy version of the Sullivans where all five brothers die on the ship, like, you can do that. You tell them, like, okay, look, you all have to be family members. You all get together, you pick whichever one of the D&D races you want to be, and you all make it, and we're going to tell this story. Like, you go that route if that's what you want to do, but that's session zero stuff, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I think that's it's pretty viable. Like, I don't see any problem with that. I think to me that makes a lot more sense, than just random crew of people just slam into each other and go, what are we doing? I feel like there's more of a bond, there's kinship, there's more reason to build inner relationships, there's more interesting intricacies there that, you know, you can kind of talk it out ahead of time. You can say, look, here's the things I'm interested in, here's things I don't really want to get into. And when you're working with a group, you're all playing into this concept, you know, so everyone's buying in. And I don't know, it's better work, I think. It makes it a lot easier to play the game.
Yeah, I think it's you know, if you don't have that, you know, that required bond already there, you get that awkward like first like, you know, 8 sessions where you're trying to figure out why am I here, and that makes really good story and it makes really good character growth when you're like, you know, something bad happened to a character, you know, they get shot or something, you bring them back to health. Now you sort of have that bond, but you almost, if you don't have that forced group narrative, you almost have to try a little harder as a GM to how do I keep them all together without, okay, well, so we did this job. Now, why do I care if we ever see each other again? Right. Compared to like, you know, you're all a group that have been adventuring or running with each other for months and months and months. You guys have built these bonds. Be what you want to be, but you guys already know each other. Comparative, you're 5 random people, but you guys have to stay together because of X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, because I need you to, please.
Right, for the love, I just need you to. So I'm not writing a new intro every other week. Yeah. But I think it helps a lot. I feel like with GMs, you don't have to worry about that first 8 sessions of awkwardness between the players. You already have. Sort of like you were saying, Jeff, like a lot of growth already happened, and you can stack on that. You don't have to worry about the shaky tower before it finally solidifies and then build. You get like a cheat sheet to the first four floors. Excuse me.
Yeah, and I like some of the games I've been playing. Like I tried out Monster of the Week, and it's a super simple game, so that part I'm not too into. But one of the things I did like is that it really leans into that collaborative storytelling element. So when you're making your characters, you pick your class or whatever, and you pick a couple abilities. But then the next page, you have certain decisions. So it's like, here's a list of like 10 things that are a type of relationship or a thing that's a problem or whatever. And it says, you know, like, okay, pick one of the other players and say, you are the person who fits this line. What is that line about? And then you describe, you know, like, oh, well, you're the bully I had back in high school that did this. And we got back together because blah. So you have that. And then the next person goes around, they pick a question. And you go around until everyone picks a certain number for each other. And I thought that was really cool because it instantly glues everything together. You have little hooks of things. It's not fleshed out yet, but you got a direction that you can explore, and it makes things make more sense. You don't have this like just blank entity it's in front of you. You have an actual relationship that you can work on.
Well, I might, and a lot of this I think I draw back, and I know Jbrews will be able to relate to this because we're going to talk about something me and him have in common, and that was the fraternity. I joined a fraternity as a lone individual. I didn't come in as a group. I didn't come in with 5 guys. I was thrown into a room with 13 other guys that became my pledge brothers a couple of nights later, and I rolled, live and die with those dudes ever since, right? Like, we didn't come in, we all had different talents. We were all brought in for different reasons. Like, they needed some sports guys. They went out and recruited sports guys. They needed some of these. They brought in these. Like, when you think of like groups that are working for corporations, or you think of groups that are working for adventuring groups, a lot of times you're recruiting somebody because of what they could do. Something they bring to the table, a skill set they bring to the table. Sometimes you don't always get along with those people very well, do you, Jbrews? Sometimes you don't even want to be in the room with some of them motherfuckers, do you? But you do. They're your brothers, and you do it. And if anyone else picks on that motherfucker, you're the first person standing right there next to him to go fight in a bar because of it. Like, that is, to me, those kind of bonds and those friendships and the way that those things are created almost out of chaos are more organic and sometimes more longer lasting than the artificial, well, me and Jbrews characters are brothers, and we don't really have 30 years of living with each other experience to really pull from on this. You know, like, and then you just try to wing it from there, that you guys are going to always back each other just because you're quote unquote brothers at that point. Like, to me, that first 4 levels of, like Jbrews said, like jump to the 4th level, the shaky part at the beginning is, in my opinion, more important to make sure when you hit level 4 that you've gone through those steps than it is to just bypass it, like cheating and say we're going to start on level 4 and we're friends for no particular reason, because we don't have that history as characters.
Huh. No, I don't know. I mean, that may be a particular to the types of relationships you have. Because, like, you have the same kind of experience with work peers, but I don't hang out with work peers, right? And some people do, but I never really have.
More than I did before.
Well, sure. But, the people I'm forced to be around, I don't tend to spend time with. And I don't feel a very tight camaraderie with people that I don't choose to be with. Now, then that may be a big difference in that you guys are part of a fraternity, and that's kind of what everyone that's going into a fraternity is going there with the express reason of saying, I want to join an organization that puts me in contact with certain people.
Right. Well, and again, it's a matter of what your party's going to look like in the tabletop game. Mm-hmm. Again, are you running a game where you're a crew of a ship? Well, you're probably on the ship because you have talents needed to run a ship. Because you're paid employees. Are you a corporation? You're there because you're the face guy. Their face guy died. They need a new one. You're in. Sometimes you're just literally a business contract at the beginning. And then, like Jbrews said, you got to go through this guy, I had to heal him back up for 5 weeks so that he can continue to be our face guy. And all of a sudden, it turns out, through conversations, I kind of like this guy. He's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of plays into maybe like a military kind of scenario where you get deployed with random people and you have to figure out how to get to work with them. But I think those require some kind of structuring outside of you to make those work. Like in your case, it's fraternity. In the military's case, it's obviously combat time or a shared experience that is outside the norm. And I guess you can kind of say an adventure does that. So, like, if you have like a really strong central theme that you guys are off to do, I think that makes that a little easier to grab the random strangers and say, yeah, we're into this together because we all have the same goal. Let's go do that thing together. And then you figure out what your relationships are together. But I don't think that's how every game plays out. And I think the role play, between people, for me, I always found that I had an easier time yes-anding and creating content with somebody if there was an established expectation. Like, we are a group of dudes who hung out together for a couple years, and we have certain in-jokes. Here's one of them. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah, that's one of the in-jokes. Cool, yeah. Let's laugh about that. To me, that was easier because we can both say, yeah, that works. Here's what we're building off of. Whereas you can get there eventually, but those early games feel real strained to me. Like, I feel like to me, it's very, I don't know, it strains my, again, it's we have opposite views on this thing of immersion, but like, for me, it strains immersion for me to try to like make reasons why I'm trying to stay with a group whenever especially in an urban setting where you have no reason to stick together, except for whatever the plot happens to be giving you.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a huge thing is trying to, and I think a lot of it goes down to back to the players. You may not, you can say, you two are brothers for this, but if they don't RP that they're brothers, it sort of breaks that immersion like you were talking about, right? So, if me and Dustin are brothers, we don't butt heads from time to time, then are we really brothers, or are we just people that are pretending to be best friends just because, we're brothers? Yeah, sure. We're probably best friends, but you're telling me that a brother is never ever just want to put their head through a wall, then you probably haven't had a brother, right? But it's I think it's not always up, right? If we're using the brother or the military friend or whatever, it's not always up and up, which I think a lot of players do. They see it like or like when people choose to be brothers, they just think, oh, it's an easy cop out. I can go ahead. We're best friends in this party because we're brothers. Like, yeah, but if you never like have those arguments or those familial issues that go on, right, and it sort of has that same level of of growth that you have to go through. But I think it also maybe come from people who are more GM focused than people who are player focused, right? So those people that are like players, they sit down and prefer to sit and just play a game. I think they prefer, hey, you know what? We all know each other. It's a lot easier that way compared to a GM. Like that's what I know. I really enjoy the first 8 sessions of, okay, so why are you guys trying to stay together? I really enjoy trying to see the players work through that. And that's where I get, to sit back for a moment and really watch that RP interaction compared to me telling my players how the scene is being set. They're the ones setting the overall feel for the game. And that's where I get to sit down and sort of sit back and enjoy the game being played. And that, at least that's my perspective on it.
Well, I think you get that with just different personalities, right? Somebody comes to the table with just a character sheet and says, I'm going to play. Yeah, you don't get a whole lot of that. You don't get a lot of the social dynamics. You don't get a lot of people interacting with NPCs in interesting ways. You just get a person there for the scene. And I don't know if that necessarily has to do with the pre-existing relationship or not. I think if somebody is prone to just, I guess we'll call that backseat, then they're going to backseat. If you got somebody who's prone to, lead conversation and be an actor type, I guess, I think you're going to get that in either case. I think it's just a different starting point.
I think what is getting danced around to a degree, if I'm going to overly simplify this, is I think the difference between Jeff and like myself and our views on how this works with force group dynamic is that I'm an extrovert. I make friends standing in line at the grocery store. I make friends standing in line at the movie theater. Like, if you're standing next to me for long enough and I got to stand there, we're going to be talking by the time we're done. Like, that's how I operate. That's why I do the things I do and why I'm good at the things I do and why I could join a social fraternity in college and excel in it, because I'm an extrovert. And I think Jeff is probably less so.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's why those things are already awkward for him, because it's just part of personality. So I think some of that is a matter of maybe who you have personality-wise at your table in those kind of ways, let alone whether or not they come in as an actor or whether they want to role play their sheet or, just game the sheet with dice and abilities. I mean, that plays into it as well, but just who they are as a person probably changes a little bit of how much of that dynamic is needed.
I think it could play into it, but I think that also comes to what a person as a player views relationships to be, right? So, like the example you were giving of just meeting somebody in a line to a movie. I mean, I could talk to those people, but I consider that just somebody I talk to. I don't consider that a friend. That's maybe an acquaintance, at that point. But
sure.
To me, that isn't a relationship that's going to really mean anything unless some other work is done into that thing to make it into more. And so I don't know, maybe it's one of those things where like I'm the type of guy who has a very small, tight circle of people that I hang out with that I'm really connected to, and then I know a bunch of people. I have a lot of acquaintances, but I don't do a lot of checking in on those people. I
think it's a difference of you're talking to the 5 people in line that are around you. And because this is a game, then the GM has something happen where you're trapped with those people for the next 3 years of your life. But because you're an outgoing person, you're steel sharpens steel. So the more you rub up and hit against those people, the sharper your blade becomes, right? Like, so the more you interact with these other people, then because you're outgoing and if you do these kind of things, whereas being more reflective or inward, in your thoughts and what you need, like, I think that changes. Like, I think that it's safe to say in our Everstorm game, because of how much we butt heads, by the time this is done, Bowron and Kodo could be best friends by the time this thing is over. Just because over the course of time, they're going to be more like actual brothers, like not like fraternity brothers the way me and Jbrews are, but like actual real life brothers, because of how much they butt heads over things.
Interesting.
By the time they're done, they could end up more like brothers than maybe even Fulcrum and Skeezer would have.
That's an interesting take on it. I don't know that I would agree with that. Like, to me, if you have a forced relationship, so like this is like the experience of like action movies or something where the couple falls in love with each other in the heart of chaos and everything. Well, if you look at that scene like a year after everything's calmed down, they're probably not together, right? Like that's the dynamics that were at play that were kind of the glue that bound things together that forced them to work through shit isn't there anymore. And I think that would be the same thing in the specific example of Kodo and Balrin. I mean, I'm not either one of the players or the characters there, but if you're really butting heads with somebody, you really have an ideological difference that really pushes you apart, and the one thing that you had in common goes away, I don't see those people sticking around together. Like, I see maybe them, like, writing each other later and being like, yo, are you still alive? Cool. Good. But, hanging out day to day? Probably not.
Do you see this much in your games, Jbrews, where you have those kind of ideological differences between PCs without the Force group?
With a particular character, just one, because of like a quality path that they took was like white hat, so they go out of their way to not cause harm to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very interesting way to, because Shadowrunners, you're probably going to shoot someone.
Yeah.
But he sort of goes from being a white hat and trying to make sure that everything's good in the world, and because of the people he's run with, sort of shaking off that white hat, and he's like, okay, you know what? Violence has a reason for this. But I honestly see it both ways. Like someone who may break down some walls for you, and so like what you were saying, Dustin, like steel sharpens steel. Just because you guys may see differently, but it doesn't mean you don't earn a respect for the way the other person sees, and then grows as a bond between those two. But depending what the ideology difference is, if you guys are obviously just like heading against wall and the only thing keeping you together was this adventure, you guys beat the big bad guy, I can see it both ways. But I don't, a lot of my players sort of get, and I think it also depends on the game. So like Shadowrun, it's mostly you're a punch on a clock or a punch on a ticket.
Mm-hmm.
We chose you because you can deck well. We chose you because you can summon spirits. It's a little bit different than with D&D, where you're an adventuring group that comes together. It may be easier if you have you're part of an adventuring guild you're coming apart to, compared to 5 random adventurers. It's a little bit more different than pretty much everyone is going to be hired for Shadowrun because you're a skill set.
Exactly.
Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be picking you out of this bucket.
Exactly.
And I think it's I'm having a little harder time saying, hey, this has never happened, because again, everyone's initial point, like their initial point they're on this job, is because they were chosen because of their skill set. And then it's up to the group to be like, I trust you enough to continue working with you, or because a little bit more than you probably should know, I probably want to keep you around by my side. Because now I just don't trust you to go blab to X, Y, or Z corporation about what you know about me.
Right. It's a matter of survival.
Right.
It's truly a matter of survival and a quality of life issue. Whereas probably in a CD&D, you don't have quality of life issues. Everybody's rolling in gold by level 5.
Right, exactly. You're lucky if you're at 3 runs in, you have like 200 new units to your name because rent's due like last week.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a different concept compared to like D&D and Shadowrun, just because again, and I don't know combat people, but you get shot at a couple times, you're going to trust the person standing next to you who killed someone that was trying to kill you more than some random person that you just walked into a bar and got a quest with, right? So that brotherhood sort of grows over time, and it's a fire starter that a lot of Shadowrun groups have. You nearly die together, and force that bond sort of created. But and then again, you sort of retire, right? You go retire. You're not going to. So if I'm still running, Jeff retires, I'm probably not have a day-to-day conversation with him unless he knows something about the specific job. It's gonna be like, hey, just making sure you haven't got geeked yet by the mage. Oh no, cool, great. Hey, do you know any information about this drug? Not, hey, you want to go get a soy calf because, and again, that goes to how your characters interacted with each other. I think it's a lot of, it's just a very interesting concept between making a story dynamic, because it's force here. You're part of this adventuring guild, so you already know each other. But then you still have that I think just because you have forced grouping doesn't mean everyone knows each other. I think that's a lot of things that people get mixed up with. Is like, I know you, but I don't have to know you. So you like, we worked in the same adventuring guild before, but I've never done a quest with you. I don't know what you're like. So you get a little bit of both worlds there, right? So you get a little bit, you guys know of each other, but you guys don't know each other. And I think that's where I more like to draw the line, because it gives everyone the capability to grow and create a character they want to, compared to what I have envisioned for the group. But again, it's like you said, Dustin, it's all based on what kind of story you're going to tell, right? So if you're on a ship, guess what? You're all going to be sailors. You're probably going to know each other in a more detailed way than a large organization.
Right. Yeah, and like I said, it's a lot of times D&D groups or fantasy groups are based around the adventuring party. Like you literally go to the tavern and pick up the little white tag of a paper. It's like bard needed, contact this number. Like that's how a lot of times, these characters get roped in when you sit down at these tables. And that's literally, and it works fine either way. It's just you have to put in the legwork one way or the other. And you're either going to put the legwork in before session 1 or you're going to put the legwork in after session 1. I think we all agree, whether you prefer to have the legwork done before or after, you have to do the legwork either way. You have to have the interactions, you have to have the time for the role play, or otherwise you have to have the perceived notion that we're just here to roll dice, kick butt, take names, and find some cool loot, and we're all going to do that together because that's how we all get cool stuff. It's almost like raiding an MMO dungeon at that point. We all show up on Thursday at 9:00 so that we can get cool loot or a chance at it, right? Like sometimes that's all your D&D or tabletop RPG party is a mutual agreement of 8 people who are going to get together, play a character through some wicked encounter for 4 hours and see if they get something cool. And if you're in the Adventurers League or something like that, that may be literally what your game experience is like. I think sometimes we have a tendency to look through it through the eyes of a solid game group that's been together for 20 years who only does their own homebrew.
Right. That's for sure. Yeah, definitely. So,
if anyone sits down to watch this, they're going to that's not my game experience at all. And I think that it's safe to say that, if you're out there and you're picking up groups or you're running with different groups or you get out of your wheelhouse and you get into these other groups, you start to find that what is your gaming group and what is required. And what will surprise you is even in those random other groups, like when I run at the game shop, they pulled random characters they had already created on D&D Beyond, threw together a party. But by game session 3 or 4, they were a tight-knit group who knew who each other was. They knew what they were doing. They role-played it out, not a ton, but enough. And they were our group. Like, fought with each other, died with each other at the end of it because I'm a cruel, cruel, cruel GM. So I've seen it work in both ways. So and I don't perceive that there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. I know what I prefer.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely not a right or wrong answer for everyone. There's a right or wrong answer for that individual.
Right.
And I mean, there is a certain component of you're sitting at a table together, you're going to be together, period. That is just above table talk. If I'm in a Shadowrun group with these guys, I'm going to keep taking jobs with them because we're going to keep meeting in real life as human beings. And so then you have to play the game of how do I justify this within a context of a character? Do I just hand wave it and say it just happens? Because it has to happen? Okay. Or am I the type of person that needs to have that's, defined what am I doing with that? Why? So that I can use that for role-playing purposes. I think I tend to be the latter. Like, I would prefer to have that information because it gives me a better handle of how to interact, to help with the improvisation, and help in building what feels like more organic and more rich and fulfilling relationships with other players than the I'm together because I'm together kind of aspect. So I don't know. I guess it's just a difference of, take on that.
So I guess I have a question for you guys, because you guys said, your campaign started 20 years ago. Well, what was your guys' intro, if you remember, of your guys' first character group all coming together? Was it forced, or was it all just a group of MP or PCs that just came together?
About 20 years ago, Jbrews, back in the ye olden days, this would have been 25 years ago at this point, because we're even older now than when we started doing this show. We were in high school, and it was a lot of power fantasy games. It was, I'm playing this paladin, and you're a ranger, and this guy over here is the cleric, and King so-and-so pulls us into a room and sends us on a quest. That's how it started. And we all just accepted the quest, and thus we were bestest friends, and we went out to do great things. Like, it was that simple.
Yep.
We didn't require nothing more than that. Well, we've refined our taste over time.
Yeah. In those early days, there was very minimal role-playing.
You could almost call us plot snobs at this point. Like, our GM will routinely throw plots at us, and we'll turn our nose at it like, no, I don't like the way that one smells. No, go away. Send me another plot GM. We're not doing that one. Like, we'll drive Levi nuts that way. We just did it last game. We put this really cool little dragonborn old dude who was going to like probably do some cool stuff for us, and we just looked at him and was like, this guy's pointless, and we just sent him packing. Like, the bar of entry now is much higher than it was back then. So, I think it's safe to say that we didn't require any formal introduction prior to King, Queen, whoever giving us quests to do whatever back then, and I think it's a little different now. So.
Yeah, and also if we look back at those days, it wasn't the same gaming group. Some of the same people were there, but we were talking about a high school where anyone who gamed was hanging out together, all at this one location, roping each other into random games. And you just played and you killed stuff and you had fun, and if you could make it, you made it. If you couldn't, you didn't. And then you kind of went. Eventually, it kind of turned into more of the narrative focus, and that was, of course, after college and everything. Whether we've talked about this a lot, whether it's the aging up, maturing a bit, or if it's some of the specific experiences and role playing that we've had, we started to get away from that power fantasy and more into the role playing side of things. And I think with that, our stories and everything started to be more and more heavily dependent upon the relationships and what that meant and how our characters bought into plots and stuff, which was never an issue before. And it seems like that is becoming more and more the case as we kind of continue to play games.
And I think the force dynamic is a really good way to get, like you were saying, like the newer people, the younger people who are in here, to get them to care about why they're doing this thing, compared to, once you've, like you were saying, matured or gotten a piece of, hey, I really like this plot, I don't care for this plot, or, start becoming choosy with your plot lines. I feel like that's when you're almost able to become a little bit more freeing and be like, now you can handle being 5 separate people, trying to figure out why they care about this group. And just because, you're working together, doesn't mean you care about anyone yet. You can be on episode 20 before you even care about one person. I think that's part of that maturing process, right? It's like, so I think as a GM, it also just gives you a way to combine everyone, herd the cats, be like, okay, now you're going on a quest. Compared to, I actually care about this person because of X, Y, or Z that you get when you sort of mature up.
So interesting that you talk about maturity. I just ran my first full-fledged D&D session with my kids like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
I got a 15-year-old, a 9-year-old girl, and a 4-year-old boy. And they all played in the same D&D game together. And I pre-made character sheets for them. And I set them down, and I put them on a battle map. And they literally just had to find the king. That was all I needed. That was the only hook there was somewhere in here, the king has been held hostage somewhere here on the map. Find him, rescue him. That was like the whole mission. They didn't need anything else to decide to work together. And in case you're wondering, is Dustin just brutal with him? Wait till I tell you how this story is.
Oh, yeah.
So my 9-year-old daughter, maybe they needed more force group dynamic in this, decided that what I did was because I knew they didn't understand the concept of hit points and stuff, I gave them snack foods. And if they lost hit points, they had to give me their snack foods, and I ate it in front of them. And then if they got healed, I gave them more of the snack food back. And their character's life was 3 iced cookies. That was their death saves. And every time they failed a death save, they had to give me their iced cookie, and I would eat it in front of them. To the point that my daughter abandoned my 15-year-old character to die at the big boss because she didn't want to lose any more of her cookies. so, so that is how that game session ended. And so it was, now my son did beat the big bad end guy on his own. He did finish the story, and they did save the king, and everyone lived happily ever after. But my daughter was adamantly running away to save her cookies. So I've trained them well.
Motivation is important. So happy.
It's all on video. I'll figure out how to get it onto YouTube at some point so you can all witness it as well. But it was amazing. So I know how to bring out the best in all my players. That's just how it.
Well, it's all about how you get your buy-in, right? And
right, it's how you get your buy-in. Cookies and Cheetos. Cheetos make great hit points.
I agree.
Let's see. Z-Bomb Gaming Girl just redeemed a wisdom check question. What is your favorite thing about being a GM or DM? And that question is to Jbrews.
I would say it's either the character, like watching the characters develop over time, or recently I'm a big lore buff. No matter what game it is, you probably can catch me sitting in a either reading a PDF of it or a book of it in my spare time. So with Shadowrun, I'm given the opportunity to spend a little bit extra time digging into the lore, and I thoroughly love that just because I get a better understanding of the world and how the world operates around them. But it's either that or just watching the characters develop over a span of time. And I'm sort of blessed to have that because I have VODs. I can look at VOD number 1 and then VOD number 45 and be like, just the difference is just mind-blowing. I think those would be my top 2 favorite things.
Yeah, I would say it's something along those same lines. Seeing how players decide their place in the world and within their group. I think for me, the biggest moments are when a player feels that their character is a real thing. When it's making choices, when it's deciding to do big moments, where it becomes exciting for that player to see this character in a situation. Like that particular scene plays out, and they're like, "Wow, that was crazy! What happened to that character?" Like I love that stuff.
Well, I think for me, my favorite part of GMing is putting situations before a party that cause the party to have to seriously think about who their characters are and where they stand on things. And I push a pretty heavily morally gray world in most of my games to the point that the choices are not easy, and it creates usually a lot of really good dialogue. It's sometimes, depending upon system, a lot of very interesting endings to some games.
Yeah, I would say the last campaign definitely ended in a weird way.
And this one seems like it's heading down the same route. Like it's so we'll see where they end up. Both groups, all my groups were pretty tight knit, lockstep groups until I ramped the stakes up to where it got too hot. Then they dissolve, and it's always interesting seeing how that process happens, when it does happen, and how it happens, and what it is that was the bridge too far.
Right. And
so I like that exploration of that kind of concept sometimes.
I think those moments require somebody to really understand their character too, and have that kind of figured out. Like if you're just playing Ranger guy, the Swordning.
The Swordning. That's a great name. We should make that game sometime. The Swordning.
That person is going to be the same throughout. Oh, I killed the dragon. Okay, that's my claim to fame. That's what I do. There's nothing really going to occur that's going to change how they interact with the world, really. Besides, I kill stuff. It's cool. Whereas if you have a character who has, weaknesses and vulnerabilities and wants and desires that aren't, statistically advantageous, the stuff of, merits and flaws, maybe from like World of Darkness kind of stuff or whatever.
Sure. Those
sorts of characters where they interact with the scene and they suddenly take a life of their own. It's like, I don't really care about money, but this character really does. Okay, cool. Why? Well, because they want to do, they got some like organization they're trying to lead and everything else, blah, 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 blah. Those sorts of motivations that put you in a position where you can have that interesting, conflict, maybe not conflict, but like more of just kind of like friction in choices, like when it becomes actually important that this character lives or dies or is disadvantaged or advantaged in a scene, in various ways, I think it requires that level of exploration of the personality to get to that point. Z-Bomb Gaming Girl, we've interviewed Jbrews before, and we did talk about how he got into D&D and tabletop role-playing games then. But if you would like to touch on that, Jbrews,
just brief overview of it.
Yeah, I went to go play some video games with a buddy of mine, and about 2 hours into gaming, he was like, I forgot I had D&D tonight. Do you want to come with? So on my 20th birthday, we decided to go sit in a garage in the middle of February and roll some dice. And it was the best time, and it sent me on this wonderful path that is tabletop gaming. But yeah, it was my 20th birthday, the actually day of, and he was just like, hey, I know we're supposed to play games, but I have this monthly session that I'll just never hear the end of. And first it was and they were extreme. They were doing 12, 13-hour sessions.
Yeah, we've been there.
So the first 5 hours, it was them playing and me trying to read through the 3.5 player handbook of D&D by myself. First time looking at it, how do I create a character? It was a good time. I mean, again, I'm all about crunching. I played RPGs before that, Elder Scrolls, and trying to min-max stuff like that. So I was automatically already starting to find those things. But it was a very, throw them to the wolves. But I'm glad I learned that way because I was able to sort of see how the GM ran it, and it wasn't my favorite thing. There was a lot of him versus us, and it caught me how I really enjoy playing the game of more of a collaborative effort. And because I took that first 5 hours on creating a character, and then I think it was 2.5 years of playing, I was able to really take into my own as being a DM. But that's me playing D&D, and then now into Shadowrun.
So I know you did some Call of Cthulhu. I know you're doing Shadowrun. Do you have any other systems that you're looking forward to maybe trying or bringing onto the stream? I know, like you said, you're doing a lot of Shadowrun because you work with Catalyst, but are they giving you the flexibility to bring other systems onto your stream as well?
Yeah, because I'm actually I'm not partnered with Catalyst. I'm working with as a a freelancer. So they're hey, you're able to play whatever. I'm not the Shadowrun stream. So they give me a lot of capability and flexibility to do really what I want. They just, hey, Thursday night, give us shout outs. We work with you type thing. But I definitely I'm thinking about bringing a Call of Cthulhu show back. I really enjoyed Starfinder just because space combat is so much fun on a giant spaceship. And then I know it's been brought up here before, but I've never played Vampire the Masquerade. And I was watching how to play on that, and it instantly took my interest, and I'm super excited to give that a try at some point as well.
Yeah. Well, I know that I think it's very likely, me and Jeff have talked about this behind the scenes. You're going to get a little behind the scenes talk here. That I think there's going to be some World of Darkness make its way to 2KB sometime in the near future.
It's possible.
I don't know exactly when or how, but I think it's coming. So
yeah, it'd be interesting. Yeah, there's definitely an itch there that needs to be scratched. And I've been binge watching people playing Vampire, and man, I miss those days. I miss it a lot. I don't know what it is exactly about it, but God, those are some good days. Nostalgia factor 9 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I've never played it. Beyond, I think it was last year was the first time I actually sat down and watched people play it. Since the new edition came out, I think last year, maybe the year before. So I watched a couple of larger channels just playing, testing through, and stuff like that, and I was like, this is extremely interesting. The hunger die and everything in it. It's the mechanics and stuff are there, and I'm really interested to see what it looks like. I I just don't know when or where I'll have the time for it. But it's on a list of things to play. That's for sure.
Well, I think that once you've dealt with the humanity mechanic, like once you see it at play, and once you get like how that part of the World of Darkness game works specifically for Vampire, like you start looking at other game systems, like why don't they have something like this in there? And I feel like I get that same thing out of Zweihander with the little alignment system when I watch those chaos dots start stacking, and occasionally an order one, and then more chaos dots start stacking, and I'm like, yep, this is going good places. It's almost like a little meter of how good a job am I doing, and
yeah,
it's nice.
I think you'd be surprised. I've been looking at the version 5 that you're talking about there. So it's, for those of you who don't know, it is the Vampire the Masquerade rules, which are like the setting of the old school.
The old school setting.
With some time lapse forward a little bit and some slight tweaks as a result. But the rule system is very different. And actually, I'm not sure that the humanity system is in there any longer.
Oh, it didn't survive?
It's actually replaced with something I think is much better.
Really?
Yeah. So
I'd be interested to read more about it. So I'll have to sit down and take a look at that book.
Yeah. So you select like convictions. These are things that you truly believe. These are things that get you across the board. You don't violate this stuff, whatever it happens.
So everyone's Sabbat now. Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Kind of.
Because you replace humanity with an instinct or a path or whatever it was, right? Whenever humanity got low enough in old school, you could switch from humanity to a different path, and that was what kept you on the being a beast.
Not in that way. So those were like codified philosophies. This is more like, I never leave a friend in need. Okay. So, that's like a thing that like, if you do that, you can regain some statistics. That's kind of your anchor point.
Okay.
Or like, I always turn on my friends, if the price is right, that kind of thing. Like whatever it is, you define it, and that becomes kind of like the core of your guy. And you have these cornerstone things. It could be like specific relationships to people, like your family or whatever. So like those things actually benefit you and have value. So your character actually cares about that stuff. And then they've redone the hunger stuff in a way that's really fascinating, which is what you're talking about, the hunger dice. So instead of just like blood points, and just like tacking around, it becomes part of your dice pool. And the more hunger dice you have, the more chance there is for you to get, I think they're called like messy criticals or messy or bestial failures. So like they can help you really succeed, but in a way that the beast wants. Or they make you fail in a way that went spectacularly bad because of how the beast interacted with you. So as you get more and more hungry, you get more of those dice in your dice pool. They start eating up other dice.
Maybe that'll be something we can talk to our friends over at Onyx Path and see about bringing on sometime and maybe get some of that going then. It sounds cool. Like I never looked at the new edition. So I love the lore and I love the setting of it. But that'd be interesting to maybe do.
Yeah, we should definitely get a game together because I've started looking at the book and I'm like, this is neat. This is cool. Like they've refixed a lot of things that were wrong with it. They've taken some good ideas from Requiem. They brought back the lore. The feels right. I don't know. It's cool. So I don't know.
Well, we get some games together. Maybe there'll be a seat open for you somewhere there, Jbrews. Like we'll keep you in mind.
Please. I know it's interesting because when you start playing like D&D for the first time, you're like, I want to be the hero always. But the more I get older, the more interested in those games that have the very fluctuating gray line of games. Those are the ones I'm actually more drawn to, like Vampire or Shadowrun or Call of Cthulhu, where you're not always a good guy. But I think those are the ones I am more drawn to than, I'm going to be the hero of the realm because it's told by 5 scripts 800 years ago.
Right. Yeah. And I'm 110% with you.
Yeah.
There ain't anything I like doing than taking a group of 5 characters who are consider themselves good heroes and watching them slowly become villains, or taking a group of headband wearing bandits and watching them slowly find themselves in a situation where they're going to save the world.
Are we? Are we?
Maybe.
Are we just covering our masses?
Trying.
I guess so.
I mean, you can't get a group like that to save the world until they have fucked it up so bad there's no other choice but to save it. So that's where you're at now.
We need a reset button, guys. Speaking of that, we did have a piece of fan art pop up that you wanted us to show off. So
I'll set the stage a little bit before we show it off here, Jeff.
Okay, and then I'll stick it right on your face so that
you put it right on my face. So last night in Horen Huttenberg, one of my players, Lindy from Laugh Love Lindy, she plays a character named Ravit. And Ravit is a convict. That's the profession that she is. And she has since taken on a second profession of apothecary, of which lets her fiddle with things like bottle bombs. Mm-hmm. And so bottle bombs have become one of her go-to weapons. So in an attempt to burn down a building full of cultists, because that's how this party rolls, lock the doors, throw in the bottle bombs, and watch them all burn to the sounds of their screaming.
They're cultists.
That was the plan.
They already gave up their souls.
But she critically failed with a roll of 100 on her 100D roll.
The worst
to throw the bomb, and it went off in her face. And we had an artist who was watching last night, Void Smoker, and he very quickly put together this piece of art that he shared on Twitter today, and we just wanted to share it with our fans here tonight. So
should be up there.
Is it coming up here?
Yeah, there it is.
There it is.
So there's
Ravit with her bottle bomb. So thank you out there for the excellent fan art. And of course,
in the robes over there with the cultist robes on.
In the stolen cultist robes that they stole from the previous encounter with the cultist. And that was probably exactly the look that I think Lindy had on her face when she saw that 100 pop up. So
just prior to the engulfed in flames that burned her friends,
and everyone else. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for that. That was freaking cool. And if I'm not mistaken, it has got a little hashtag at the bottom for Shittober, which is
Shit-timber.
Shit-timber. Well,
it's September.
It's probably going to be Shittober. Let's just be real. But yeah, that was really cool. So not very often that you just randomly get fan art.
Yeah. So since we got some fan art, we definitely wanted to show it off. It was fantastic. So
awesome. So we are in that point of the show where we do our outros. So Jbrews,
that's right.
What should people do to find your content? Where do they go?
Yeah, there's a couple of different places you can go. You can go over to twitch.tv/Jbrews or youtube.com/Jbrews11. Jbrews, the YouTube just has We Run the Night stuff on it currently, which is our weekly Shadowrun game that we have on Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Mm-hmm. And then Twitch, 3 to 8 or 3 to 9 p.m. every Monday through Friday. You'll catch me there either playing Tarkov or some Shadowrun or some dabbling into some MMOs once again for the 80th time of my lifetime. So you may see some of that as it's real talk. It's oof. But yeah, one of those two places where you can catch mostly. We also have a Twitter at We Run the Night RP or at Jbrews11 on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. And if you're watching on YouTubeville, I put the links into the comments and actually the description actually. So go check that out. You can also find him over on our Discord server. So I'll go ahead and link that real quick. Because I know Jbrews hangs around over there. So if you do want to interact, get some questions asked, if you want to double check on those links and all that kind of stuff, that's a good place to find him. As well as a lot of other people we know. We have a promote section in there. So you oftentimes find their content just waiting there for you. So go check it out. Dustin, got any particular announcements for this week?
Well, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
First and foremost, here at TT2KB, next Monday, we have Luke Gygax coming on the show.
Freaking awesome.
So if you're fans of D&D, if you're fans of the Gygaxes, you'll be able to find Luke here with us next week. So we're looking forward to have him here and talk. Tomorrow, before all that happens, though, tomorrow, Cameron will be back on at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time for Bardic or Barbell Knowledge. I've lost track of which one he's doing.
As well. Yeah.
He might even be playing Super Mega Baseball, though I think he ended his season, so I don't know if he's doing off-season stuff online now with it or what he's doing. But Cameron will probably be doing something tomorrow night. I don't know if he's exactly made a full decision on that either. Wednesday night if I'm not out drinking with my coworkers, you'll find me here doing GM prep for Zweihander. So I'll be doing some GM prep because boy, do I have a lot to do. Yesterday's session was bonkers, and I've got a lot I got to get done. I also have a Thursday off stream Zweihander game that I prep for during these sessions. So if you're around and you're hanging out with me, sometimes I'll let you help me make an NPC, help me make a battle map, help throw good ideas out there for things that we're doing. I gave you some of the nuts and bolts of how the Roll20 works for Zweihander too. Show you how to macro weapons onto sheets, things like that I'm going to have to do. So you get to kind of play along and hang out with me and chat. And so that's what I'll be doing Wednesday night, most likely. Thursday, video game night. We've been doing them a lot off stream lately. Are we going back on this week?
We'll talk to the guys. I wouldn't mind going back on stream for this time now that we've had a few, just us.
We took a few weeks off.
Yeah.
So
got to refill the batteries so we can get back into entertainment mode for you guys. Trying to find a game that's really resonating with us right now, but yeah.
My battery's solar. It never drains.
It's too bad we're in a world of darkness. And then this weekend, if I'm not mistaken, this Saturday, we have ourselves...
Should be Everstorm.
Yeah, Everstorm. 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And I will be debuting a new character. So
That's right.
I've already told Levi I'm getting my character to him. It's going to be all ready. We got the Lollygaggers showing up with 5 viewers.
Oh.
Thank you very much. We are doing our outros as we speak. So thank you for stopping
them
in.
Lollygaggers.
Always lollygagging in.
They probably brought a Chuck with them, if I had to guess. Did they bring a Chuck with them?
Probably. They'll get this in a second.
Because I think they're playing Vesson tonight. Were you guys playing Vesson?
Big Eye, Small Mouth?
Yeah.
Good times.
Oh, since he's here, I got to nail him down because we talked about it last night.
Oh, okay.
When I get around to running my 3rd installment of Zweihander, which I am gearing up for in early 2021, right. Protista 117, Dan, I see you there. I want you to play in it.
Yep. There's a reason. It'll be cool.
So,
and then I think this is an off week for Zweihanders. We're not playing that Sunday, and that brings us back through the whole week.
I need 2 weeks to recover. But for the people who just joined, again, next Monday, 10 p.m. Central Time here, we have Lou Gygax going to be on the show.
Oh yeah.
So if you're big fans of D&D, again, come by next week when Luke is here with us. Thanks again this week, Jbrews, for coming, hanging out with us, talking some Shadowrun. And, congratulations on getting to work with the people at Catalyst. And I hope that continues to work out well for you. And, looking forward to, what did you miss, Dan?
Dan.
Dan. What I was saying is I told Chuck yesterday that when I get around to running my 3rd installment of Zweihander, which will be the sequel to Horror in Huttenberg, which is the Vigilantes of Valandria, that I want you to be one of my players, Dan, because we know you always die at the end.
That's right.
So, and that is also in a reference to the design that the Defenders of Cobalt have put out for Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is Dan dies at the end. So if you haven't seen it, it's out there. It's like 50 cents on a drive-through RPG. So go out there and find it. It's a good time.
Oh yeah.
Now I'm going to go ahead and find us a raid target. We're just going to pass along these raiders right to somebody else.
That's right. And I'll go ahead and you want me to put us on the outro screen while you look? Or
yeah, go ahead. I think we're
going to go.
I think Gathering of Nerds is playing some World of Darkness, so we're just going to go bother them. So
all right. We'll see you over there, folks. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Jbrews. And we'll see you guys next week.